If you're like most people thinking about retirement, then you are probably asking yourself the same critically important question. Am I on track? The question of, am I saving enough money or am I spending too much money? That's essential because if you want to be financially free, you need to know where you stand. My name is Ryan A. Hughes, and I am the investment manager at Bull Oak, one of the fastest growing financial planning firms in the US. And today I built a simple spreadsheet that calculates the most important numbers that you need to know as you approach retirement. And in this video, I'll walk you through it step by step using an example so that you can feel comfortable as you create your own situation. And yes, you can download this exact same sheet for free down below. So let's begin. It's important to know that as we go through this Google Sheets that I put in fake data, right? This isn't a real client data, but I try to keep the numbers pretty realistic so that we can go through the key indicators, which is really the output, like the key information that you want to take away from this entire exercise. So let me walk you through how this works. So to begin, there's 4 tabs that you need to be aware of. There's dashboard, there's income, there's expenses, and then there is savings. So the income tab, the expenses, and the saving tabs, they all feed into this dashboard tab right here. So whatever numbers you put in, it's going to give you the output over here. And really what you're trying to take away from all of this are these 6 numbers down here, these key indicators. So you're going to know what your savings rate are, your burn rate, your debt rate, your vacation rate, your tax rates, and then finally your housing rate. And then I'm going to go over what those 4 key indicators are so that you can provide a little bit of context to see exactly where do you stand. Let's begin. So with income, you're going to want to fill out person 1, which is going to be yourself, and then person 2, if applicable, your spouse, all of their incomes in monthly figures. It's really important to know that whatever numbers you put into this Google Sheet, you use nothing but monthly numbers because we will keep everything in monthly format and annualize all of them in the very end. So for this exercise, we're assuming that the base pay for person number 1 is going to be $15,000 per month, and they receive $5,000 worth of RSUs. So it's $20,000 on average. Now, RSUs, they can be given in different increments, or they can be allotted to you or granted to you in different increments, but I'm just going to figure out what is an annualized number here. And the same goes for person number 2, $12,000 per month, $4,000 in bonuses. Again, nobody receives bonuses every month. It's pretty rare that really occurs. But if it's annualized, obviously just divide by 12. And then the last one is we assume that the couple has a rental property, and we assume $1,500 per month is going to be coming to them in rental income. This is also important that as you fill out this rental income number, that you're putting in the net number, not the gross. So if you're going to be receiving, let's say, for example, $5,000 gross, but you have a mortgage on it, you have property taxes, you have insurance, you have HOA fees, you have maintenance fees, you need to subtract all of those numbers out from this figure and put in that net number. And so once you fill out this income sheet, that's going to flow over here into this income summary. So there's the $20,000 for person 1, and then there's the $17,500 for person 2. It's going to combine that in a monthly number, and then it's going to combine that for an annual income number of $450,000. On to the next tab, we have expenses. Now, this is a pretty daunting sheet to look at, especially as you have to go into it and input every single number. Now, you don't really have to, right? This is an exercise where the more granular you go into this, the better the outcome. But if you have a credit card which tracks all of your different expenses, or if you use some type of online software like youneedabudget.com or something similar, then you can use those figures and plug them in yourself, right? But if you haven't gone through that, or if you have a spending problem, I would highly suggest that you go through this exercise and input it one by one. It's a really good exercise, especially as you approach retirement and you want to be financially free. You need to know exactly where your money is going. And if you don't really know where your money is going, you're saying, well, gosh, like I bring in X amount of dollars, but I don't know how I'm spending all of that and not saving as much as I want to, you need to go through and just categorize all of your expenses. So for this example, we assume that they have a mortgage, they have HOA, so on and so forth, but that all sums down to a total basic housing number of 8350. And then we plugged in some utilities. It's important to know that a lot of these expenses are not going to be monthly expenses or even annual expenses. And so you need to put in some number because you know that some of these figures are going to be maybe once every 3 years and once every 5 years. Like, for example, maintenance on your house. You're not going to be having maintenance on your house every month or every year, but you are going to be having maintenance on your house, let's say every 5 years. So you got to plug in a number because that's a real expense that's going to be ongoing for the rest of your life. Food, health insurance, education, medical expenses, charity. The big one that I did want to go over here, or two big ones rather, is going to be your car payment. So a lot of people will say, well, I just paid off my car. I don't have a car payment anymore. So I'm going to leave that as zero. Well, that's okay for now, but are you going to keep your car for the rest of your life? Maybe you'll keep it for the next 3 years or maybe even 5 years, but are you going to keep the same car 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And the answer is probably no. So you need to plug in some type of a realistic number into this as a real ongoing cost. Plus, I think it's good to kind of build in just a little bit of buffer numbers in here. So you want to estimate maybe just a little bit, like a little bit higher than you normally would in these figures because there are a lot of unexpected costs. And so you want to build in that buffer within your budget. And then the last one, the big key takeaway is taxes. Now, a trick that I like to have my clients go through is I like to figure out what is their projected annual income, and then I project out what do I think their effective tax rate is going to be, both at the federal level and the state level. Now, if you live in the state of Texas, good for you, or any other tax-free state income tax, that number is going to be zero. But for everyone else, you want to figure out what an effective tax rate is, and I just take that number and I multiply it by their income as a plug. Or even better yet, you could pull out last year's tax return and get a really good idea of what you think your taxes are going to be this year. So again, all of these numbers get categorized up here. So you fill in this cream colored plugins here, then it totals the number down here, this 8350, for example, for basic housing. And then that gets pulled into this summary over here. So for this example, this client is spending $29,551 per month. That's a really big number, but we're also assuming that they have a really big income, right? This also includes taxes. So whenever we say, what is your total monthly spending? We're also including a tax number in this as well. So if you want to get a better idea, like what am I actually spending? Normally not including taxes, obviously just exclude taxes. So for this couple, it's going to be about $19,000 per month. These numbers down here get pulled into their expense number here as well. So, but we just add in this annualized number here as a last piece. Now, the last tab is probably one of the most important tabs, is going to be your savings tabs. These numbers, I'll get into this a little bit later, but these numbers should be the difference between your income and your expenses, right? You have money coming in, you spend your money, whatever's left over is going to be your savings. But whenever we go through this exercise, you'll find that it's not always going to line up, but we have a check for that. So we'll get in that in a little bit. So for person number one and for person number two, we assume that they are maxing out their 401ks. So $23,500, and we're just assuming that they're making monthly contributions into their 401k. They're also getting an employer contribution as well, so they match into their 401k. And then for this exercise, we assume that they're saving about $2,000 per month into an outside taxable brokerage account, which is being invested. So total, they're saving $7,266 per month. And again, this number gets pulled over into the savings summary, and then we annualize that number. Now, before I get into the results and break them down, I wanted to talk about that check. And this is the gap that I talked about. Is there anything that's being unaccounted for? So what we did here is we said, is there a monthly savings and expense gap? And all we did was just take the income and we subtracted expenses and savings to see if there's any gap. Now, the closer to zero this number gets, the better. That means that everything is accounted for. If you go through this exercise and you see that this number is very large, like 2,000, 5,000, whatever big number, then something is wrong, right? You're not tracking some number somewhere. Either your income is too low or too high, your expenses are too low or too high, or your savings number that you put in here is too low or too high. Now, the number one culprit that we see is that people are not accounting for enough expenses. So make sure that you get your expense numbers correct. So for this client here, this number is pretty close to zero. So this is a pretty good job of accounting for all these different figures here. So let's talk about the output and the key indicators here. So the first one is going to be your savings rate. So your savings rate is simply is what percentage of your income are you saving? And whether that's going to be in a bank account, in your 401k, I do include employer contribution in the savings rate. Some people don't, but I think because it is your money, as long as it's vested, that vested part is the key number, then this should be calculated as a part of your savings rate. Now, your target is you want to set aside somewhere between 20 and 25% of your income and save that money. For this situation or for this client, they're right at 19%. So they're pretty good right there. They're on a pretty good track. If they could just nudge it up just a little bit, again, these are estimate numbers, then they'll be right on track. Next on here, we have the burn rate. So a burn rate indicates how much of your income are you spending. Now, this number does not include any debt payments. So if you have a mortgage or if you have a car loan, this number is not calculated in this number. It is instead calculated in the debt rate, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, a target burn rate is pretty typical, somewhere right around 30 to 50%. Obviously, if you're below 30%, even better. That means you're not spending as much money. But if you find that your burn rate is higher than 50%, each situation is a little bit different, and your situation might be necessary for that. But typically, if it's over 50%, then that means that you probably have a spending problem and you need to find somewhere to actually cut your expenses. Debt rate is 20% for this client. Now, this follows the 28-36 rule. And so the goal is that you don't want to spend more than 28% of your income on debt payments. And this includes all debt. This does include your mortgage. This does include your car payments or credit card debt or home equity line of credits or any other type of debt that you may have. And so for this client, they're right at 20%, which is sustainable. That's a good number. That means that they don't have on too much debt. Typically, what you will see is this number will be very high along with the housing rate number, which again, I'll talk about it in a little bit, if you have too much house. So people who extend themselves and they buy a much more expensive house than they can afford, this number will indicate and trigger a red flag and saying, hey, both your debt rate and your housing rate is too high. That's a sign that you bought too much of a house and it's probably not sustainable unless you increase your income. Vacation rate. So this is a number that we created here at Bullock. We went everywhere and tried to figure out what is a sustainable vacation rate number, and it just wasn't there. So we looked at all of our clients and we came up with a benchmark number, and that number is 5%. So whatever your annualized income is for your household, try not to spend more than 5% on your annualized vacation. So if you are making $100,000 per year, $5,000 per year on total vacation seems very reasonable and sustainable to me. If you're making $1 million a year, then $50,000 is very sustainable from that standpoint. So that's a number that can kind of slide with you and keep with you as you are in the earning and saving years of your life. Again, these are benchmark numbers. Your own situation can be unique, but it also does not apply to somebody who is currently in retirement. Obviously, if you're in retirement and your income isn't there, pretty much all these indicators go out the window. That's okay, because this is designed to help you get to retirement, and everything is just a benchmark to say, all right, where am I at relative to my income? What am I doing with my money? Am I being smart with all of this income that is coming in for me? So for this situation, they're right at 8%, which is very big. If a client sat down with me and we calculated their numbers and their number was 8% and they were not hitting their savings target, this would probably be the first place that I go and say, okay, is this number real? Are we inflating big years? Maybe this number is artificially inflated because they had a really big family reunion in Europe last year, and that was a one time thing, and that's not going to be projected out into the future. Okay. Or are you really spending too much on vacation? Right. And so we'd have a talk there and see if there's a way that we could actually bring this number down. The fifth number here is going to be the tax rate. This number you don't really have too much control over unless you have a really good tax plan. Taxes are taxes. You can't escape them, but you can be smart about them. So we look at this number and say, okay, is there anything that we can do, and from a legal standpoint, to help reduce this number as low as possible? And so for this example, they're at 28%, which includes their federal and their state income taxes. And then last but not least, kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is the housing rate. So 24% of their income is going towards their housing. You don't want this to be more than 36% of your income, and a good benchmark number, which is pretty comfortable, is going to be 30%. So they are below both of these figures, which means that they're not house poor. They're very comfortable, which is exactly the reason why they're able to save so much money. I would give this client an A minus as terms of a financial plan. They're making good money and they're not spending it all, right? There's that common trap where as you make more and more money, you want to kind of keep up with the Joneses and buy the bigger house, buy the nicer car, go on the bigger vacations. And that's fine as long as you can afford it and you're saving. I would say that the number one thing that you want to focus on as you complete this budget worksheet is going to be that savings rate. It's by far the most important number, and obviously the bigger the better. And I know as you go through this, it can be daunting and there's a lot to consider, and the stakes only increase as your net worth gets bigger. And that's where we can help. At Bullock, our advisors work with clients every day to build retirement plans that make these big decisions clear and actionable. If you'd like to make sure that you're on the right track, click the link below to schedule an introductory meeting with one of our lead advisors. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.